I awoke in the darkness. For a moment, I was unsure of where I was, who I was. The blackness was all-encompassing, smothering. In a panic, I lashed out my hands, connecting with the coffin lid, and that's when it all came rushing back, and I settled back down into my own grave. Something had awoken me from my long slumber, a noise, a certain delicious aroma, and there it was again. The sound of scraping feet and heavy breath. My nostrils flared and I breathed in that delicious scent, the scent of spilled blood and fear. For a moment I considered going back to my dreams, terrible as they were, but the bloodthirst was too much and I sat up, pushing the stone lid off my sarcophagus aside, where it crashed to the floor with a resounding thud. There was a man in my tomb, the moonlight dancing across his crumpled form where he stood leaning heavily against the stone walls. "Right then," he gasped, "just like Miss Natasha said, all this time." He winced, clinging to his bleeding side. "You've been here all along." "I'm as real as you are," I said, stepping out of my grave. My voice sounded rusty after so many years without speech. "How is it you know of me? And who is this Natasha? Is she one of the family?" "Yes," he said. "She told me of you, begged me to find you. After the Germans arrived, said that you were here, the guardian of the family, that her grandmother told her." Then he tapered off, coughing harshly, blood wetting his lips. Something stirred in me then, but I fought it back. Drawing closer as I did, he cowered down into himself, my face washed in moonlight. "Germans? Why are the Germans here? What are the French? What of Bonaparte's army did they find the chateau?" "Bonaparte," he gasped. "That was over 100 years ago. The Germans are here now. They've invaded Mother Russia. Those black dog Nazis are crawling all over the countryside. They came to the house. They have Natasha and Isabel. And they use them for entertainment." "Entertainment?" I growled. "They use my family for their entertainment." "Yes," he sighed. Weakly. "My own family was killed, lined up against a wall, shot, while I hid like a coward. I managed to escape, but one of the sentries saw me fleeing into the night and did this." He removed his hand from the gaping wound. "I ran to the family cemetery to find you, and so I die like I lived. Serving the family." "You were a servant, then?" I asked, squatting down beside him. "Yes. My family have served the House of Radek for nearly 100 years, and that's how we know of you and your legend, a guardian, a spirit who has protected the family for centuries, but I see now that you're no spirit," he said, looking hard into my face. "You're something else. Up here, yes, a vaudeville." I nodded solemnly. "Yes. I am a vampire. The family is all that is left of my mortal self. They are the descendants of my own children. I've watched over them for centuries. When the French came, I moved them far from the fighting and installed them deep in the chateau in the forest. Then I built this place," I said, looking around at the damp, cold walls, and I went to sleep as the dreaded day spilled its sunlight over the world. Now you tell me that I've slept over 100 years and my family is in danger once again from foreign invaders." "Yes," he said weakly, and I realized he had very little time left. "What is your name?" I asked him. "Dmitri." "You are a good and faithful servant, Dmitri. Will you serve the House of Radek one last time?" I have grown weak in my long slumber, and I have need of substance and knowledge. In your blood is the memory of all you have done and all the knowledge you have learned in your days upon earth. I have need of both, like never before, if I'm to save the family. You understand? You want to drink from me? To drink my blood? I nodded, but said no more. Will it hurt? He asked, resigned to his fate. Only a little, I answered, like the sting of a bee in sweet summer, then only ecstasy and beautiful darkness. Very well. Take what you need. I have nothing left in this world and would see the face of my children once again. Gently. Oh, so gently, I took his face in my cold hands. He shuddered at my touch, and I tried to back away, but I caught him up. My head darting forward, piercing his throat. What ecstasy, then, as his blood filled my mouth, gushing down my throat. But it was all over far too soon, and I fell back against the cold walls of my crypt. His fresh blood on my mouth and his dying thoughts racing through my mind. Monsters, I whispered into the darkness. Now his knowledge was my knowledge, and I knew my family was in terrible danger from these Nazis who had swept across the world, killing millions. Death camps, I whispered again, and they call me monster. But I had never killed for an ideal, or put a man in chains to serve my own greed. I had only ever killed to survive. Did the lion or the tiger not do the same? Rising to my feet, I knew all that was about to change. These Germans had invaded my home and defiled my family. Killing them would be a pleasure, and I intended to revel in it. I rose to my feet, feeling the blood working on my body, returning some of my old strength. I turned, meaning to be about my business, but I could not leave poor Dimitri's body to the rats. So I scooped him up, and I laid him in my stone crypt, gripping the stone lid up as if it weighed nothing. I marveled at my restored strength before heading into the night. If the world outside had changed, I could not see it. The night was cold and snow fell heavily, frosting the nearby trees. All was the same as I had left it, except for a few snow-covered graves nearby. Strolling over, unmindful of the cold, I wiped away snow from a leaning tombstone. The inscription read Elizabeth Roddick, 1890 to 1910. Taken into dark waters. I wondered who she had been, this daughter of my lineage, and why she had died so young. It was a temptation to examine more of these ancient markers, but I had no time to tarry, and so I headed into the driving snow towards the distant lights of the chateau. Using the great speed of the vampire, I was there in moments, laying prone in the snow upon a small hill that overlooked my former home. The chateau was more like a small castle than anything else, and yet my eyes saw only the wood hut that had once stood in its place. I had once lived there as a mortal man, but that was before the Turks had invaded, and I had left my family to go to war, conscripted by the noble man who owned the land and everyone on it. I remembered the biting cold, the forced march, many dying of sickness and fatigue before we had reached the battlefield, the rows of men, the frost glinting off their armor, the war cry and pounding of the drums from the Turkish hordes, fire in the night, the clash of steel and screams of dying men. An arrow tore into my side, and I ran from the madness into the night, desperate to survive, to see my family once again. Just over a week later, I had staggered into my yard, half dead from starvation and the terrible cold. A small light flickered inside, but I sensed even then that something was terribly wrong. Hurrying as best I could in my feeble state, I stumbled into the doorway. My eyes widened in surprise as I looked at the filth-covered stranger that sat by a small, flickering fire. It was a woman covered in dirt and rags. Her eyes burned crimson in the firelight as she turned to face me. "Who are you?" I demanded. "And where's my family?" "Your family? I thought this place was abandoned, yet you are the rightful owner?" "I am," I said, hungry for the fire's warmth. As soon as the words left my mouth, the woman started to shake violently as if in the grip of some great seizure. Blood burst from her nose as she screamed, barreling past me into the night. I turned shocked, and there she was. She stood at the threshold looking at me longingly. "Please," she begged. "You must invite me back inside." I was cautious of her now and thought her a madwoman. "Why should I do that?" I said, blocking the doorway. "I have news of your family. I know where they are. Invite me back inside and I will tell you the truth of it." "Very well," I conceded. "Come back inside and then out of the cold. Tell me, is there any food left?" "No," the woman said, gliding towards me. "There's nothing here, and I myself am very hungry." At her approach, I noticed for the first time how beautiful she really was under all that dirt. The paleness of her skin, the way her eyes seemed to catch the firelight. "So tell me," I said, falling into a nearby chair. "Where are my wife and children?" "Here," she said, grabbing up an unseen letter from a shadow-soaked table and thrusting it into my hand. Quickly, I tore it open, and I began to read. The letter was from my wife. She told me that she was afraid and alone, and that our neighbors had told her of the approaching Turks. She was taking her children and fleeing to the capital. "God keep them safe," I groaned, staggering to my feet and shambling toward the door. She laughed then. "Where do you think you're going?" "To find my wife and children," I said over my shoulder. "You're either too stupid or too stubborn to realize. You're dying." It was as if her words held some terrible prophecy. Suddenly, the room started to spin. My legs gave out as I slumped in the doorway, the swirling snow freezing my face. "No," I gasped. "I can't. Not now. My children." "One cannot barter with death," she said, drawing nearer. "But one can become it." Reaching down, she drew me into her arms and carried me back into the room, and laid me by the fire. "How?" I gasped, horrified by her terrible strength. "What are you?" "We have many names. My own I've forgotten over the long centuries, but you can call me Babette. One name is as good as another. And for what I am Mori, vampire, one of the undead. Do you see?" She smiled, revealing teeth a wolf would have been proud of. "You're dying. But you are brave, strong, and willful. And I've been alone for far too long. I would make you one of us. You'll be damned. Have to kill every night of your life. But you will live. Cursed as we are, you will live. Or," she shrugged, "you can accept the nature of things and die. Here. I'm hungry, and will ease your suffering with my kiss. But you can never see the faces of your children again. Now decide. Time grows short for you." I could no longer speak. Black blooms were filling my vision, and it felt like I was falling. In a last desperate attempt, I grabbed her skirt and tried to pull her towards me. "Done," she said. And so I became the creature that I became. On a howling, snow-filled night much like this one. And in this very place over 500 years ago, in a ramshackle hut I had once called home. The hut was gone. In its place stood a fine house, a sanctuary where I had watched the descendants of my children grow, thrive, prosper. But now, once again, invaders had come to our land and my family was in terrible danger. Crawling through the snow, I broke through a line of trees and got the first real look at my home. Damn them, I cursed from between gritted teeth. The whole place was lit up like a Christmas tree. Searchlights swept the courtyard, and armed sentries patrolled the grounds. A little away from the house stood some sort of iron chariot on wheels. I searched the blood memories of a faithful Dimitri and saw that this was a truck, a thing for transporting weapons and people. There were 4 of them drawn up, side by side. In front, men stood by a smoking barrel, warming their hands over the flickering flame, their cold breath scenting the night. They smelled of iron, leather, and blood, and for the first time the hunger in me rose like some terrible malignant spirit, intent on my undoing. For a moment I tried to fight it, but it was too strong. Bones like daggers speared through my gums as my fingers grew talon-like and sharp. I was moving now, slithering through the snow like some wretched demon intent on their destruction. As I drew near, I heard one laugh. "She's a feisty one, all right. Fought like a polecat, but a few knocks to the head put her majesty in her place." "Yeah," another one laughed. "She didn't have much time left when I got to her. Shame about the other. She picked up a knife. Captain put a bullet in her. No one threatens the SS." On hearing this, I screamed into the night and leapt amongst my tormentors, sending the fire barrel flying, scattering burning hot coals amongst them. In their panic, they tried to draw their weapons, but I was already amongst them, tearing at their flesh. Blood spattering the snow, and there were cries of alarm from the house. I didn't care. I would destroy these men, tear them limb from bloody limb for whatever they had done. All were down now, all but one who had fallen into the snow, bloody but very much alive. He drew his weapon from his shoulder. There was a deafening roar as hot lead peppered my body, but still, I came on, grinning my ghoulish grin. "You cannot kill me, friend," I hissed, grabbing him by the throat. I lifted him off the ground, letting my chisel-like nails slowly tear through his flesh. He began to gargle, his eyes bulging with terror as I closed my fist, tearing out his throat in a welter of blood. Others were on the run now, closing in on my position. For a moment, I was tempted to stand out and fight, but I had already lost the advantage of surprise and so melted into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness as I faded high into a nearby tree that loomed over the grisly scene. Seconds later, more men arrived. Their leader, a tall, slender man dressed in a long black coat and peaked cap. A death's head insignia gleamed in the darkness. "Mother of God," he gasped. "What happened here?" Another man tried to answer him, his mouth working silently before he staggered away, doubled over and breathing hard. "A bear, perhaps," an older man with a large mustache said. "It's winter here, Sergeant," another man interjected. "All the bears will be hibernating." "It's always winter here, fool," the sergeant spat, cowing the other man. "What else could have done this to such heavily armed men?" "Look," the captain said, bending down and scooping up a rifle. "One of them had managed to get a shot off. So where's the creature's body?" "Probably ran off into the forest to die," the sergeant said. "The snow is starting to get heavy. We could form a search party to hunt down or to confirm, but we would probably just end up losing more men to the cold." "Yes," the captain said, "but I want these men covered over and the sentries doubled. Tomorrow we'll form a search party at first light and a burial detail. It's late. I wish to sleep. You're in charge, Sergeant. Wake me up at first light." That said, he marched away, leaving the other men to carry out the assigned tasks. Yeah, prick, the sergeant muttered as he walked away. I hope his Weisswurst freezes off in the night. Unlikely, another man chipped in. He had me cutting up firewood for his room in the tower all day. More was said, but I missed it, so I was already on the move, flitting between trees, heading up for the aforementioned tower. If you wanted to kill a snake, you cut off the head, and this particular snake was resting its head under my very roof. But that was fine. I had built this home and put certain measures in place, in this case a secret entrance that stood at the base of the tower, one of the two, the other a tunnel leading from a cellar deep in the forest. Only one of the two girls now lived, and everything hinged on her survival. Moments later, another man lay crumpled at my feet, dead and drained of his life's blood, the thing I had seen through the blood kiss. For this one had served in Poland at a place called Auschwitz, and my only regret was I couldn't kill him twice. Quickly I moved into the shadows of the tower and selected a certain block of stone. I pushed it, exerting all of my supernatural strength until at last, with a grudging grate, it gave and sprung a rusting mechanism and revealed a hidden door. Moving with the grace and stealth of a vampire, I ascended the winding staircase until I saw a flickering light just around the corner and heard the scraping of a booted foot on stone. Springing from the shadows, I leapt at the startled man and drove my fist through his gaping maw. With a spatter of bone and teeth, I grabbed his spine and tore his head free, gathering the fallen body before it could clatter to the floor. You died too fast, I spat into his face, before laying his head back onto his body. From the other side of the door came a sleep-filled grunt, and all was still. Slowly, I pushed to the door, which swung open easily. Not even locked, I mused. How arrogant these men of the so-called master race were. But there was only one master here, I thought, as I crossed the night-darkened room to the bed. The leader of these men, the so-called captain, lay on his back, his breathing heavy and regular as he slept. Gentle as a lover, I strangled his prone form and slapped him rudely awake. With a cry, his eyes flew open, but I had already seized the twisting tongue, my other hand wrapped around his throat. After a little time, he stopped his grunting and heaving, knowing he was trapped, and slowly I lowered my face towards his, smelling the urine that spilled from him as I drew closer. "You are a dead man," I whispered in his ear. "How you die is up to you. I have lived many years, and I know how to draw out a man's death. Such sweet agonies I could show you before you die, or you could answer a simple question and die quickly and painlessly. The choice is yours. Do you understand me?" Quickly he nodded his head. "I shall release you now. If you cry out, I will rip the tongue from your head. Do we have an understanding?" Again he nodded, and I withdrew my fingers from his tainted mouth. "The girl?" I asked. "Where's the girl?" In the cellar," he babbled. "She's not been hurt. I kept her from the men." He took a sharp intake of breath at the look on my face and tried to scream, being a man of my word. I tore his tongue from his mouth and I cast it across the room before driving my fingers through his eyes and piercing the diseased brain beneath. He buckled and spasmed, but was soon dead. I wiped my hand on the sheets, eager to be rid of his tainted blood before heading for the cellar. I encountered no more men on my travels, though I sensed them sleeping or patrolling nearby. When I arrived at the cellar door, I found it unguarded but locked. Concentrating my force, I pushed near the lock until the door jamb splintered and finally gave way, revealing the room inside. What I saw then turned my blood cold. Amongst the barrels and kegs lay a naked girl, perhaps no older than 30. upon the cold stone. Her marble skin was covered in boot-shaped bruises, the skin on her thigh torn and scratched. Blood seemed to be trickling from every part of her body. Her breathing was harsh and shallow. No. I cried, running forward and falling to my knees where I gathered her up. She looked at me then, and I saw the fine features so resembled those of my long-dead daughters. "My child," I whispered, rocking her to and fro. "My sweet child, what have they done to you?" She looked up at me, but did not scream at my terrible visage. "You are real, then. Natasha always said it was so. She would spend hours when we were children looking at your portrait hanging in the main hall and playing round the family crypt. Our grandmother told us that you were there, a family spirit, sleeping but ever vigilant, our protector. But you could not protect us. Now Natasha's dead." She sobbed weakly. "And I'm dying. They broke something inside of me, and now I'll die here. Alone." My head was reeling now. The last of my family were here, dying in my arms, the last vestige of my mortal self. "No," I whispered into the darkness. "I won't let it end like this." Slowly, almost reverently, I raised my wrist to my mouth and I bit down hard. As the blood began to flow, I pressed it to Isabel's mouth. "Forgive me," I whispered. But she only smiled up at me weakly and began to drink. The rest of that long night was punctuated by the screams of the dying, and Isabel took her revenge on her tormentors and her sister's killers. She did not rush into her deaths, but made them suffer long and loud. And when the screams subsided, I left the cellar to find her. She was in the ballroom, setting to rights a fallen Christmas tree. All around her lay the bloody, torn hunks of flesh that had once been men. I smiled at her as I passed. Her long, slender arms caressed my shoulders. It was getting close to dawn now. I sat upon the window ledge, contemplating all that had been done that night, hearing my heavy sigh, and perhaps sensing my mood. Isabel glided across the room and put her head against my shoulder. "What is it, Father? Do I not please you?" "Very much," I said, patting her cheek fondly. But much had been lost that night. My family's no more. All those long centuries guarding my beloved children, and now they're no more. "You have me," she smiled up at me. "A daughter that will be with you forever." "Yes," I smiled back gently. "For that I am blessed. But it's not the same. All that was left of me, all that was mortal, lived in you, and now it's been lost forever." "Oh," she laughed. "Is that all? Come," she said, drawing me away from the window. "I have a special Christmas gift for you." There under the Christmas tree, just as the first rays of light defiled the darkness of night, she whispered 2 words: "Bucharest" and "brother." Hey there, kids. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's story, and I wanted to tell you thank you, for listening to me at all. I'm actually coming up on doing this for 10 whole years. Come January 4th, I will have been doing YouTube for 10 years. So that's a hell of a thing, man. And honestly, it means nothing without all of you. So thank you for that. Thank you for listening on YouTube or on the podcast. I also want to give a very big thank you shout out to all of you guys out there on Patreon. If you guys want to check out patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, you're able to support the show, support me, support my cats, support, being cool folks out there, like people like these. Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Mr. Thud, Ken Lando Higuchi, Chompski, Bobby Karman, Nico Kaeo, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Raven Hart, 1-800 Nightmare, King Hades F13, Unknown Nobody, Joshua Mcmeekin, Michael Scharbrough, Kazan, ThisIsMyRealNameNoShit, Jason VB Wilson, InfernalOne, Lilwulfgaming, JimboTheHutt, Caspian, Jordan Nells, Hades Nephew, Jordan Wayne Deckard, Bradley Leipe, and Charron, AcidSystem, Mike Bullock, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Brian Arce, Cryptic Nightmares, Brianna Wright, Someone You Love, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Thomas Burgett, Liam Newman, Sky Harbor, Caleb Dougal, Nina Smith, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. Thank you guys so much for your support on Patreon. I really can't thank you enough. And everybody who's down there in the description, thank you guys so much as well. And everybody who's not on either of those tiers, who just have $1 on Patreon, I can't thank you guys for making these past 10 years incredible. This entire time I've ever spent on YouTube, on podcasting, everything amazing. And all of you who are at home listening, thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful, happy holidays and sweet dreams.